In 1879, a 16-year-old youth departed his father's agricultural property, destined for Detroit during an era when transportation relied solely on railroads or horse-drawn vehicles, and early motor cars were primarily regarded as recreational vehicles for wealthy individuals. This youth would eventually establish an automotive enterprise that would transform the trajectory of the car manufacturing sector to its current state. 35 years following his Detroit arrival, 50% of global vehicles bore his surname, and this young man, Henry Ford, would emerge as among America's most affluent individuals in history. This represents his narrative. Henry Ford entered the world on his father's agricultural estate on July 30th, 1863, in present-day Dearborn, Michigan. His father, William Ford, possessed farmland where the entire family resided and labored, and now, as the eldest among 6 offspring, Henry faced expectations to inherit the family enterprise. Nevertheless, he differed completely from his father and showed no interest in the business. During that period, agriculture demanded intensive labor, proceeded slowly, and proved demanding. Although Henry attempted to assist with farm operations, he despised the fundamental concept. "I never possessed any specific affection for farming. It was my mother on the farm I cherished," stated Henry Ford. Like most children his age, Henry disliked attending school and never progressed beyond 8th grade. He preferred learning independently and developed strong mechanical interests from early youth. This machinery fascination drove him to examine every mechanical device he encountered. At age 12, his father presented him with a pocket timepiece, and after manipulating its mechanisms, he mastered disassembling and reassembling it within minutes, along with his friends' and relatives' watches. He subsequently earned recognition as a timepiece repair specialist and started fixing watches for neighborhood residents. When Henry reached 13, he encountered a steam engine initially during an educational excursion to a Detroit company, transforming his mechanical passion into an obsession. This became his primary hobby for subsequent years. By 15, he had built his initial steam engine, but his circumstances changed when Henry lost his mother, Mary Ford, to unexpected illness. Henry maintained a profound connection with his mother and felt closer to her than anyone else on the property. Devastated by her passing, Henry's farm hatred intensified. He sought escape from his circumstances since the farm contained excessive memories of his beloved mother. After reaching 16 and opposing his father's desires, Henry gathered his belongings and departed the village seeking new life direction. During that time, Detroit rapidly transformed into an industrial center thanks to steam technology and ology. The city sought young engineers for employment. Here in Detroit, Henry would immerse himself completely in self-reinvention by mastering everything regarding machinery. He secured employment at a streetcar manufacturing establishment known as Michigan Car Company Works. Unfortunately, Henry faced dismissal merely 6 days after starting. Following unemployment, he obtained apprentice work at James Flower and Brothers Machine Shop, earning $2.60 weekly. However, this proved insufficient for rent expenses, so Henry utilized his childhood fixation effectively. He found nighttime employment as a jeweler cleaning and repairing timepieces, 6 hours nightly and 6 days weekly for $3 per week. Despite managing multiple jobs to survive, Henry continued studying and experimenting with machinery during available time. In 1882, upon turning 19, Henry Ford chose to return home to Michigan. He still detested farming, so performed minimal work there and spent most time playing and experimenting with farm machinery. Fortunately, his father had acquired a portable steam engine, which had rapidly become standard among farmers. Henry devoted most time to this machine and became so proficient that a neighboring farmer paid him $3 to operate his steam engine. From there, Ford's mechanical talent and ability spread throughout Michigan. Word of Henry's skill reached the district representative of Westinghouse Engine Company from Schenectady, New York, resulting in company employment. Henry's role involved traveling throughout southern Michigan, installing and maintaining Westinghouse steam tractor engines. In 1885, Henry encountered Clara Jane Bryant at a New Year's Eve celebration and became engaged the following year. As a wedding present, Henry's father gifted his son 40 acres of land, but rather than converting it to farmland, Henry harbored different plans. In 1891, Henry and Clara relocated to a small Detroit apartment. Around this period, Henry discovered a British publication and learned about gas engines. This gas engine was manufactured in limited quantities by German engineer Nicholas Otto and differed significantly while proving far more efficient than steam engines. Primarily, they required no 30-minute startup period because the engine completed all necessary combustion internally. Although this new engine gained popularity rapidly in Europe, few Americans knew about it. Fortunately, he located someone in the city who possessed one. Henry immediately developed affection for the gas engine, but couldn't comprehend its operation. And the fact that electrical sparks powered the gas engine complicated matters further. Knowing he required additional knowledge, Henry applied for night engineer work at Edison Illuminating Company for $40 monthly salary. During that time, the company represented Detroit's largest electrical company, generating electricity for 1,000 city homes using steam engines, making Henry more than qualified for employment there. His primary job involved repairing engines when they malfunctioned or developed problems, but when functioning properly, he had minimal additional responsibilities. This provided Henry ample time to immerse himself in electricity learning and understanding its operation. In 1893, Henry and Clara welcomed their first and sole child, Edsel Bryant Ford, and merely 3 months after his birth, Henry received promotion to chief engineer position at $100 weekly salary. That identical year, Henry succeeded in creating his initial functional gas engine, representing the first step toward his horseless carriage dream. Not until June 4, 1896, at precisely 1:30 a.m., did he finally complete his experimental vehicle using a gas engine he named the quadricycle. The quadricycle essentially constituted a crude contraption consisting of 2 bicycles positioned side by side and powered by a gasoline engine. While the experiment succeeded, it possessed several issues. This experimental vehicle had 2 gears, neither designed for reverse or forward motion, but the primary problem was lacking a cooling system, making the car susceptible to overheating. After extended operation, Henry made multiple vehicle adjustments, but the most significant involved adding a cooling system. He later sold the vehicle for $200 and used the money for another major project. With Detroit mayor support, Henry began constructing his second experimental vehicle and completed it by July 1899. This new car was larger, sturdier, and heavier than the previous model. One morning, Henry took wealthy lumber merchant William Murphy for a test drive in his new vehicle. By the test drive's conclusion, William desired participation in Henry's business venture, and soon afterward they agreed, and on August 5, 1899, Detroit Automobile Company was established. Unfortunately, the company failed only 1 year later due to several reasons. Henry's vehicle improvement ideas conflicted with stakeholder concepts who pressured him to manufacture passenger cars. Another reason was because most required car parts were produced by different companies, and consequently, whenever deliveries arrived late, the entire factory had to wait for delivery. This significantly slowed production time. His initial car, called the delivery wagon, required 6 months to manufacture, and only 20 were made during the company's first 2-year existence. Due to all this, Henry was dismissed from his position, but despite his first company's failure, he remained optimistic. Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. Henry actually felt relieved when dismissed, because pressure decreased and now he could focus on other matters. Henry decided to direct attention toward racing cars. The reason was simple. Racing cars had become extremely popular sport in the United States, and Henry wanted a platform to showcase his cars and their quality. Besides, despite knowing many very popular city residents, few would willingly invest in his ideas after the Detroit Automobile Company incident. 1 year later, Ford's newly designed racing car defeated Cleveland automaker Alexander Witten's vehicle, as well as the nation's leading national racing driver at Grosse Pointe. Henry's 26-horsepower vehicle became the town's discussion topic, and that popularity gave investors the confidence needed to support Henry the second time. The result was Ford Motor Company's birth, with Henry as chief engineer. Not long after, Henry's position again hung on a thin thread. The reason was because Henry continued making race cars, which infuriated his investors. They wanted him to create passenger cars they could sell to masses, so they brought in another Henry Martin Leland to fulfill their demands. Ford was annoyed they had brought in someone else to replace him, so he left the company. In his autobiography, Henry is quoted saying, "I resigned, determined never again to put myself under orders." Henry Leland, conversely, followed his investors' wishes and proceeded to create what today we recognize as Cadillac. With Henry Ford gone, the company name changed from Ford Motor Company to Cadillac Motor Company. Henry and former racing cyclist Tom Cooper continued building racing cars. In 1902, they produced the Ford 999, an 80-horsepower car driven by Arnie Oldfield, a former bicycle racer who had never driven an automobile, surpassing Winton's car again. By 1904, Henry's new car broke all American records, driving at 91.4 miles per hour top speed. With these records and victories, Henry had established himself as America's best racing car designer. With that reputation, he knew investors would support him again whenever he was ready to start his third company. With support and financial backing from 11 investors, especially a coal dealer from Detroit, Alexander Young Malcolmson, Henry's third company came to life. The company was initially called Ford and Malcolmson Limited, but was later changed to Ford Motor Company in 1902. After failing in his first 2 attempts, he was determined not to fail again. Ford turned his attention to creating a vehicle that was affordable for common people. You see, at the time, owning a vehicle was a luxury that could only be afforded by wealthy individuals. The reason being these vehicles were made by extremely skilled engineers, and most cars made were strictly for racing. At his new company's start, Henry made a statement to his associates and investors. "I will build a motor car for the great multitude, constructed of the best materials by the best men to be hired, after the simplest designs that modern engineering can devise, so low in price that no man making a good salary will be unable to own one." Ford had a talent for identifying and attracting the brightest business talents. He hired many impressive young men who shared and believed in his vision. As for car design, Henry made over 20 before he got one that finally worked. He called it the Model A. For the next 5 years, Henry kept improving the Model A, which was followed by the Model N. But in those 5 years, what really changed wasn't the improvements of his designs, but how they were being made. One of the things Henry learned from his failed businesses was the importance of having one manufacturer responsible for supplying most parts he needed to build his cars. So he found a Detroit machine shop to do just that. One day during a Chicago trip, Henry witnessed the assembly line concept at a slaughterhouse, and that's when a bright idea came to him. If he could incorporate the same idea into building his cars, he could make more cars daily. You see, at the time, Ford and many other car makers assembled one car at a time, and production was slow. So in 1904, Henry raised more money and built his own factory. He employed over 300 workers and began experimenting with the assembly line inside his new factory. It wasn't until 1906 when the Model N production would really first utilize the assembly line. But even then, the assembly line was still work in progress. However, it did increase production level by 5 times, and his new model became the best-selling car in the US. But Henry had set his sights on even greater things. Henry built his own manufacturing company in 1905 to start making his own engines, transmissions, and everything else needed for his car's production. Around this time, Henry also discovered vanadium steel, and it was this discovery that really paved the way to a new era for the automobile industry. Vanadium steel was about 3 times stronger than previous steel and much lighter. Henry used this new steel for his new model that would later become one of the most successful cars in human history, the Model T. A business absolutely devoted to service will have only one worry about profits. They will be embarrassingly large. Henry Ford dreamed of making automobiles for common people and everyday use, and the Model T was the answer to that dream. When first released, it was one of the most expensive cars Henry had ever made. The Model T price was set at $850, which would be something around $21,000 in today's currency. But despite its price, it quickly became a fan favorite in the US. In a matter of days after its release, 15,000 orders were placed, and Ford Motor Company soon became the #1 car company in America. What else could he want? Henry realized he needed a bigger factory to produce over 100 Model Ts daily. So in 1910, he built a new plant in Highland Park, Michigan. After several experiments, the assembly line was officially in working order by 1913. This allowed work to be taken to workers rather than workers moving in and around the vehicle. The vehicle was pulled down the line, building it step by step, and the new process reduced production time from 12 hours to 90 minutes. By 1914. Their production rate of over 300,000 vehicles was more than all cars produced by other car manufacturers combined. Between 1910 to 1916, the number of Model Ts being produced moved from 20,000 to almost 1,000,000. By then, about half of all Earth's cars were Fords. Henry had another brilliant game plan that would make him stand out in the automobile market. Every year, the number of Model T's production output increased, so he reduced the car's price. In fact, by 1916, the Model T price that once sold for $850 was now selling for less than $400. But that wasn't the only brilliant strategy Henry adopted. You see, despite Henry pioneering America's automobile age with the assembly line, many of his workers weren't happy with this innovation. Many workers found doing the same thing over and over again boring, and skilled craftsmen among them found their new job insulting, as they were tasked with just 2 duties instead of building a whole car. As a result, workers began leaving Ford to work for other companies. To combat this, Henry doubled the workers' wage, raising it to $5 daily. Many companies laughed at this move, believing it would quickly bankrupt the company, but it did the opposite. Mechanics from all over the country flew to Detroit in search of higher wages. We believe in making 25,000 men prosperous and contented rather than following the plan of making a few slave drivers in our multi-millionaire establishments. Not only did Henry Ford increase the wages of mechanics who now worked for him, but he also gave them an hour off from the number of hours they were required to work. The change in shift allowed Ford to hire a new set of workers for a 3rd shift and create a 24-hour operation. Soon enough, many other car businesses had to do the same in fear of losing their workers to Ford. Henry had changed the business and manufacturing world across the USA. There is one rule for the industrialist, and that is, make the best quality goods possible at the lowest cost possible, paying the highest wages possible. In 1919, Henry Ford grew tired of interference from other investors in the company and decided to buy them all out. The result was several millionaires in Detroit, but it also made Henry Ford the sole owner of the largest automobile company in the world. Later, Henry made Edsel Ford, his 26-year-old son, the president of his company, but it was Henry who really ran the show. However, absolute power over the company came with a price that even America's richest man couldn't ignore. Henry continued to believe the Model T was the car most people wanted. He ignored the growing popularity of more expensive, but stylish and comfortable cars like Chevrolet. Being the stubborn and stiff-necked man that he was, he refused to listen to other Ford executives, or even his own son Edsel, when they said it was time for a new Model Dot by the late 1920s. Henry could no longer ignore the declining sales figures. So he finally decided to shut down the Model T assembly line and began designing an all-new car. The new Model A was released in 1927, but this new car was no longer produced at Highland Park, but at a bigger factory along the Rouge River in Michigan. In his new factory, Henry wanted to include all steps involved in the manufacturing process, from refining raw materials to the automobile's final assembly, which he accomplished. It became the world's largest factory, making steel, glass, tires, and other components that went into building cars. However, Ford's one-man control over decision-making was no longer the formula for success, and by 1936, Ford Motor Company had fallen to third place in the U.S. market behind General Motors and Chrysler Corporation. Even with Henry's latest innovative design of the V8 engine, it wasn't enough. Things only went from bad to worse. And with the Great Depression's rise, Ford was forced to lay off workers and lower his rates. In 1943, Henry's son died of stomach cancer, so he kept running the company for 2 more years before turning over his control of Ford Motor Company to his grandson, Henry II. Henry retired to his estate and later died of a cerebral hemorrhage on April 7, 1947. Life is a series of experiences, each one of which makes us bigger, even though sometimes it is hard to realize this, for the world was built to develop character, and we must learn that the setbacks and griefs which we endure help us in our marching onward. Today, Ford Motor Company owns a market cap of around $70 billion and remains as one of the biggest car companies in the world. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed. For now, until the next one.